Welcome back to MLA Citation Basics. This is part 2. We left off talking about punctuation. We were punctuating paraphrased material mostly, but now it's time to take a look at using quotations in your writing. In this example, we have some quoted material from an article, and we want to remember where to put all that punctuation, quotation marks and period. So since it's quoted, we're going to end our quotation first. Then we'll use our parenthetical citation to tell our readers who the author was of that information and what page number we found it on. And then we'll drop our period in there. Now sometimes quotations can be a little tricky, especially when they have quotations within what you're quoting. So what do you do with this sort of information? How do you punctuate it? You simply use single quotes inside your double quotes to show that the words were quoted within your source document. That's right, remember the double quotation marks indicate that you are taking something word for word from a source. But if there's already a set of double quotation marks around some of those words, just change those to single quotation marks inside of your double quotation marks. See how we've changed those quotation marks? And then we close our final quote with double quotation marks at the very end of the sentence there. Now don't expect your research to speak for itself. Often I've seen students just put out a quotation and leave it hanging there. Introduce it in some way with a signal phrase or a verb. In this case, we're using a signal phrase, according to. That works really nicely and helps your sentence flow. But you can also use a signal verb. In this case, we use argues. See how nicely that sentence flows. We have all the information that we need. You can use a signal phrase like according to introduce information, but it's a lot more fun to try to use some action verbs too. So here's a list of a few things you might try. If the author is sort of neutral about his topic, you might simply say he comments or he describes or explains. But maybe your author is arguing a point that's sort of contentious. You can use words such as argues, claims, contends, even insists. But you might also have some information that the author is just suggesting an answer about, or maybe inferring information about. So use things like concludes, finds, proposes, speculates. But remember, you want to pay attention to tenses. So when do you use the present tense and when do you use the past tense? Well, the simple rule of thumb is if you're talking about what an author says in his article, use the present tense. Here's an example. In this case, Hoke argues that hip-hop is part of the African continuum. It's something that he says in his article, and it's always going to be there in his article. Now, what about the past tense? When do you use that? Well, if it's something that specifically takes place in the past, you can go ahead and use the past tense. Here's an example. In Burke's article, she writes, Bird McPhee started the dance festival in order to, and explains the quotation there. So starting the dance festival actually happened before the article was written and before the interview was conducted, so we put that in the past tense. Now what if you're writing about literature? Think of it this way, if you're reading the story, whatever's taking place in front of you in that story happens in the present tense. That's what you're going to tell us. You're going to use the present tense. If it's something that has taken place before that story starts, use the past tense. Remember that in-text citations are only part of the story. They point us to the direction of where you got your information. But everything that you list in your paper must have a corresponding entry on your Works Cited page so that your readers can go there to find out the rest of the story if they need to. So let's take a look at what we've done. We've included this piece of information from Danny Hoke, and we're going to go look on the Works Cited page to find exactly what article that came from. So now if I have any questions, I know where to go. Another example from that other article that we looked at We have a quotation. We know that it came from Burke, but I want to find out more. What's the rest of the story? I'm going to go to the Works Cited page and look up that entry so that I can go find the article. Some general advice. The very best piece of advice you can have is to cite as you write. Don't wait till you've written the entire paper and then go back and fill in those little holes, because you will miss something and you will get caught for plagiarizing. So just cite as you write. You have that source open right in front of you. You're quoting it or you're paraphrasing it. Whoa, take a minute. Just put that page number and that author information down right now. A few more points to consider. Use quotations and summary sparingly. When you paraphrase, don't just put a few words in there that are synonyms for what's already there. Truly put it in your own words. Make sure you understand the source material you are using, because if you understand it, you're going to be able to use that effectively as evidence that supports your claim. And after you introduce source material, make sure you comment on why it's relevant to your thesis, or elaborate on it a little bit further. And introduce your source material in a variety of ways. Most of all, make sure that those sources are credible and scholarly. You want to avoid web sources like personal websites or blogs because they might be biased. School websites also might not be as scholarly as they could be unless they're created by a noted professor. Definitely avoid sites like Suite 101, Ask.com, E.com, any site that's constructed really for the purpose of generating essays and actual cheating essays rather than actual research. These are a big no-no. Wikipedia is fine to get some general background information, but it's really mostly common knowledge information anyway, so don't use it in your source or as a source in your paper. What you can do is look at the bottom of that Wikipedia entry for some of the sources that were used to create that entry. Go directly to the source there. Those would be allowable. Some good sources to use from the web are things like online scholarly journals or magazines retrieved through a database service like Galileo. Also, you can use recognized online newspapers like the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, especially papers that have both a print presence and an online presence. You can also use information from established professional organization websites like the MLA, APA, or NCTE, things like that. For more information on how to use sources, how to cite sources, how to format your paper, check out these websites: the MLA official website, the Purdue Online Writing Lab, and the Bedford St. Martin's Press. Now go write that research paper.